at her coat.
Hae-Rin? What happened? Tell me you didn't come here to kill me.
I wish I could.
Hae-Rin.
Don't come any closer.
What did they threaten you with?
Your mother.
The ballroom was full of light and money, and the low hum of 100 conversations, and none of it meant anything the moment the doors opened and Hae-Rin walked in. The string quartet kept playing for a few more bars before the musicians noticed the shift, moving through the room like a current under still water. Heads turned. A woman near the bar whispered something to her husband and he didn't answer, because he too was watching Hae-Rin cross the marble floor in a black coat that didn't belong at a charity gala, her face pale, her eyes fixed on one person across the room. Marcus Reed set down his drink. He knew her walk, he knew the tilt of her chin when she was trying to look calm and failing. This was not the woman who smiled for cameras. He had never seen this version of her before, and something about that made his chest go tight before she'd even said a word. Hae-Rin. She didn't answer. Her eyes moved past him toward the exits, toward the security men already murmuring into their sleeves, clearing space that hadn't existed 30 seconds earlier. The music died mid-phrase. A glass shattered somewhere near the bar and no one moved to clean it up. What happened? Marcus asked. Nobody answered. That silence was worse than anything they could have said. He started walking toward her slow, the way a person approaches something wounded. That was when he saw it, the shape of something held close beneath the edge of her coat, her hand trembling around it. He stopped her. Tell me you didn't come here to kill me. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. I wish I could, she said, and the words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like something closer to grief. Hae-Rin. Don't come any closer. Her voice cracked. She raised the object just enough that he understood the danger without fully understanding it, because there was still so much he didn't know, so much the last 6 months hadn't prepared him for. Then why are you crying? He asked quietly. She opened her mouth, nothing came. Her phone buzzed against her palm. She looked down and whatever color remained in her face drained away. Marcus saw her hand start to shake harder. What did they threaten you with? She looked up at him, and for a moment the woman he loved and the stranger in front of him seemed to be fighting for the same face. Your mother, she said. The room went silent around him. 6 months rearranged themselves behind his eyes in an instant, and still none of it told him what was about to happen next. Before we continue, tell me, if you were Marcus, would you trust someone who suddenly entered your life with a secret? Keep watching and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. 6 months earlier, Marcus Reed didn't know Hae-Rin existed. He was 34, and Reed Horizon Capital occupied 4 floors of glass above Manhattan, and from his office he could see most of the skyline he'd spent a decade building his name into. He'd started with a borrowed desk at 26. Now he had 400 employees and a habit of not needing anyone he didn't have to. His mother, Diane, was the only real exception. She still let herself into his penthouse unannounced, still brought food he wouldn't eat because his chef didn't season anything the way people actually cook. You've been working too much, she told him one evening, setting a container down on the counter. I'm fine, Ma. You're never fine, you're just quiet about it. She studied him a moment. Your father used to do that too. Marcus glanced up. His mother almost never mentioned his father. What was he like, really? Something crossed her face and disappeared. Complicated, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. She kissed his cheek and left before he could push, and Marcus sat with the word complicated for longer than he meant to. He flew to Seoul 3 weeks later for a partnership that mattered more than most, Reed Horizon's entry into Asian infrastructure investment, 2 years in the making. The trip was supposed to be simple. The reception was held in a hotel ballroom overlooking the Han River. Marcus was an hour into a conversation about shipping tariffs when he noticed a woman standing alone near the windows, watching the room the way a person studies a chessboard instead of a party. He found an excuse to cross the room. "You're the only person here who doesn't look like they're enjoying themselves," he said. "I'm not here to enjoy myself." Her English was careful, unhurried. "I'm here to watch." "Watch what?" "People like you." She looked at him a beat too long. "You should be more careful about who you trust, Mr. Reed." Then she was gone, and Marcus stood there with his drink half raised, more curious than he wanted to admit. "Who was that?" he asked the shipping executive beside him. The man glanced over, then quickly away, lowering his voice. "You don't want to know that family, Mr. Reed." That should have ended it. It didn't. Her name was Hae-Rin. He learned that 2 nights later, when she appeared again at a private dinner he hadn't expected her to attend, 3 seats down the table, watching him with the same unreadable calm. "You came looking for me," she said when he sat beside her afterward. "I came looking for answers. You gave me a warning instead." "Sometimes that's the same thing," almost a smile. "Why does it matter who I am?" "Because you're the first person in this city who hasn't tried to sell me something." That surprised a laugh out of her, short, immediately regretted, as if laughing in front of him were a mistake she hadn't planned to make. She asked him a few minutes later an odd question. "Your company holds infrastructure contracts through several regional partners. Do you review those personally, or does someone else?" "That's a strange thing to ask a man you just met." "I like understanding what I'm looking at." She didn't explain further, and Marcus let it go, chalking it up to the kind of sharp curiosity he found himself drawn to rather than wary of. He didn't know, and wouldn't for some time, that she'd asked because she'd been told to. 2 days later her phone rang while she sat alone in her apartment on the 11th floor of a building her family owned through 4 companies, whose names meant nothing on paper. "Have you made contact?" The voice was flat, unhurried, the voice of a man who didn't ask twice. "I've made contact. And he's guarded. It will take time." "Don't take too long." The call ended. Hae-Rin sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment before she set it face down on the table and didn't pick it up again that night. Over the following weeks, Marcus found reasons to see her that grew thinner each time he invented one: a follow-up on the shipping deal, a mutual acquaintances dinner, a coincidence neither of them fully believed. On a rooftop bar overlooking Gangnam, he told her about Baltimore, about his mother working 2 jobs so he could stay in a school with a working computer lab, about being the only black kid in most rooms he later found himself succeeding in. "People assume it was easy," he said, "because of where I ended up." "I don't assume things about people," Hae-Rin said. "I've learned that's usually a mistake." "Learned it from where?" She turned her glass slowly on the table. "My family," she said, and offered nothing more. He noticed the pause before certain questions. He noticed her phone lighting up mid-conversation, her glance at the screen, her decision not to answer. He noticed that certain names, mentioned in passing by other people, made her posture change for half a second before she caught it. He noticed all of it and said nothing, because he liked her, and liking her made him want to give her room instead of an interrogation. He also noticed, 3 weeks in, that she remembered a comment he'd made once about hating the taste of certain wine, and quietly ordered him something else without being asked. She noticed, around the same time, that he stood a half step in front of her without thinking whenever they crossed a busy street. Neither of them mentioned either thing. Both of them filed it away. There was an argument early on that neither of them would have called an argument at the time. Marcus took her to a restaurant he loved, the kind of place with a 5-month wait list, and watched her push the tasting menu around her plate without much enthusiasm. "You hate it," he said. "I don't hate it. I think a plate should not require an explanation from the waiter before I'm allowed to eat it." "That's very particular." "I'm a particular person." She glanced up, almost daring him to argue. "You brought me here because you thought it would impress me." "Did it?" "No, but I'm still going to let you pay because it would be rude not to." That earned a laugh out of him, loud enough that 2 tables turned to look. And he didn't care. "Next time," he said, "you pick. Next time I'll take you somewhere with plastic chairs and better food." "I'll hold you to that." She did 2 weeks later, a street food stall near her apartment with no sign and no menu, where the owner recognized her by name and Marcus ate something he couldn't identify and admitted, grudgingly, was better than anything on that 5-month wait list. It became, without either of them naming it, a kind of ongoing negotiation. His world, then hers, each of them a little more visible in it than they meant to be. It was around then that Marcus introduced her, carefully, to Victor Answer. Victor had been Marcus's closest advisor for almost a decade, a calm, precise man in his 60s who had known Marcus since the early years of Reed Horizon, back when the company was 3 people and a rented office. He'd helped Marcus survive 2 hostile takeover attempts and 1 very public lawsuit. Marcus trusted him the way he trusted almost no one else in business. "She's sharp," Victor said, watching Hae-Rin across the restaurant where the 3 of them had dinner. "Careful, too. That's not always a bad thing in a person, Marcus, but it's worth noticing." "You saying I shouldn't trust her?" "I'm saying you should trust yourself enough to notice things either way." Victor smiled, easy, unbothered. "I like her. I just like you more, and I've buried enough friends' bad decisions to know the difference between caution and paranoia." It sounded at the time like the kind of thing a man who genuinely cared about Marcus would say. Marcus didn't think about it again for weeks. A confidential due diligence file from the Seoul negotiations turned up somewhere it shouldn't have 3 weeks later. Forwarded from an account inside the hotel where Marcus had been staying, into the inbox of a junior analyst at a rival firm. "Someone with access to your suite," Hae-Rin, his head of security, told him grimly. "Or someone close to the deal." Marcus thought of Hae-Rin before he wanted to. He didn't ask her, not yet. He mentioned it to Victor instead, half-hopping to be talked out of the thought forming in his head. "I wouldn't jump to conclusions," Victor said, frowning over the report. "These leaks happen more than people realize. I'll have my people look into the routing." He set a hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder. "You've got a lot on you right now. Let me carry some of it." Marcus was grateful for that in the moment. It would be a long time before he thought to wonder why Victor's people never actually found anything. Hae-Rin found the leak first, though Marcus never knew it. She traced it in a single night to an assistant on her family's payroll who'd been paid separately to duplicate the file for a buyer connected to a rival syndicate. She intercepted a second, far more damaging document before it could go anywhere. She didn't tell her father. She didn't tell Marcus either. A man named Suh, broad-shouldered, careful-eyed, someone who'd known her since she was a girl, found her in the parking garage beneath her building 2 nights later. "Why did you stop it?" he asked. "I didn't stop anything." "Then what would you call it?" She met his eyes without blinking. "I call it doing my job carefully." Suh studied her a moment longer than she liked, then let it go, though something in his face suggested he hadn't quite believed her. Marcus's mother met Hae-Rin for the first time over video call not long after, a small, deliberate gesture Marcus hadn't planned, but hadn't talked himself out of either. Diane watched the screen for a long moment after the call ended. "She's lovely," Diane said. "Where did you say her family was from?" I don't actually know much about them yet." Something moved behind his mother's eyes, not quite alarm, something quieter. "Be careful, baby," she said, and changed the subject before he could ask why. Her father summoned Hae-Rin to the house on the hill 2 days later. 6 weeks, he said, not looking up from his desk. "What do you have?" "His trust, it takes time." "Time isn't something we have." He finally looked at her. "This isn't a courtship, Hae-Rin." "I know what it is." "Then act like it." His eyes didn't move from hers. "We need what's inside his secured servers before the next board vote. Get closer." She left the house with her jaw tight, drove for an hour with no destination, and ended up parked outside Marcus's hotel without going in, sitting in the dark, trying to decide which version of herself was supposed to win this particular night. She went up anyway. She told herself it was only to keep the assignment on schedule. They ended up on the balcony instead, 2 glasses of wine neither of them finished, Marcus telling her about the first year of Reed Horizon, when he'd slept in the office more nights than not because he couldn't afford both rent and a functioning printer. "You could have quit," Hae-Rin said, "gone somewhere safer." "I thought about it every week, probably." He looked at her sideways. "What about you? Ever think about walking away from whatever it is your family expects of you?" The question landed closer to the truth than he knew. Hae-Rin looked out at the skyline for a long moment before she answered. "Every day," she said, and it was the most honest thing she told him since they'd met. Weeks passed, the dinners stopped needing an excuse. Marcus stopped checking whether seeing her again made professional sense before texting her. Hae-Rin stopped reporting every conversation back to the number that expected updates, telling herself the ones she skipped weren't important enough to mention. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, Marcus found an old folder in his father's storage unit while looking for something else entirely. Tax records, mostly, faded photographs he barely remembered. Near the bottom was a business contract from 22 years earlier. A joint infrastructure agreement between his father's small logistics company and a Korean firm. The signature line read, Seoul Group. He sat with the page a long time before calling his mother. Did Dad ever do business with a company called Seoul Group? The silence lasted a beat too long. Where did you hear that name? I found an old contract, Ma. What happened? It was a long time ago. It has nothing to do with you. It has his name on it, and it might have something to do with someone I've been seeing. Her voice went careful in a way he recognized from childhood, the voice she used when she'd decided a conversation was over whether he agreed or not. Be careful who you let close to you, Marcus. That's all I'll say tonight. It wasn't an answer. It told him more than she probably meant it to. Hae-Rin, unaware Marcus had found anything, went looking for her own answers not long after. Her father kept a locked file at his study desk that she'd never been permitted to read, a private investigator's report on the Reed family, compiled years earlier at his request. She waited until he left for a dinner she knew would run long, and she opened it. What she read didn't match the story she'd grown up believing. According to the file, the original agreement between the two families hadn't collapsed because Marcus's father stole from them, as she'd always been told. Somewhere in the transaction, a signature had been altered. Terms had shifted after the fact. Someone outside both families had profited from what came after. She sat with the file long past when she should have left, the version of history she'd inherited coming slightly unglued at the edges. She didn't tell her father what she'd found. She didn't tell Marcus either. Not yet. She wasn't sure that night what telling either of them would cost her. Marcus noticed her pulling away before he understood why. You've been somewhere else lately, he said one evening in her apartment, the city spread out gold and quiet behind her. A lot on my mind. You can tell me things, Hae-Rin. She looked at him a long moment, and for one dangerous second it seemed like she might. Her lips parted. There are things about me you wouldn't understand, she said instead. Try me. I can't, not yet. Her voice caught on the last word in a way she didn't manage to hide, and Marcus noticed it and didn't push, because pushing had never once made her open up faster. He would wonder later whether that had been the wrong instinct. That same week, though, there was a quieter evening that had nothing to do with any of it. Hae-Rin showed up at his office unannounced, past 10, still in the clothes from whatever obligation had kept her out that afternoon, and found him alone on the floor of his own boardroom, tie undone, staring at a spreadsheet he clearly hadn't looked at in an hour. You look terrible, she said. Thank you. She sat down across from him, on the floor in a dress that had definitely not been designed for sitting on floors, and didn't say anything else for a while. Eventually he told her about the investor threatening to walk, the numbers that weren't adding up the way he needed them to, the particular exhaustion of being the only person in a room who wasn't allowed to look afraid. You don't have to perform for me, she said quietly, not here. I don't know how to do the other thing. Then don't do anything, just sit. So they sat, on the floor of an empty boardroom until well past midnight, not solving anything, and it was, Marcus would think much later, one of the only nights that whole year he hadn't felt like he was carrying the company alone. 3 days after that, her father called her back to the house on the hill, and this time there was no room to negotiate. The board vote is Thursday, he said. We need the access codes to his secured servers before then. Why now? Because it's owed. His eyes didn't move. You have 3 days. Hae-Rin didn't sleep that night. She thought about the file in her father's study, about a 22-year-old story that might not be true the way she'd been raised to believe it. She thought about Marcus on that rooftop, asking if she ever thought about walking away, and the way she told him the truth without meaning to. On Thursday, she used a password she'd learned in passing, never asked for, and copied the files her father wanted. She told herself it would buy her time to fix things. She believed it for almost a full day. Marcus's systems team flagged the breach 48 hours later, traced to a device linked to her building. He confronted her that night, his voice quieter than shouting, which was somehow worse. Tell me it wasn't you. She didn't answer, that was the answer. 6 months, he said. You met my mother, you let me tell you things I've never told anyone. His voice cracked once and he hated that it did. I trusted you. Marcus. Don't. He left before she could find words that might have mattered. And Hae-Rin stood alone in her apartment a long time after the door closed, not moving, not calling after him. Marcus's investigation into the breach, once it started in earnest, turned up something that didn't sit right. The access was clearly hers, that part wasn't in question. But buried in the same server logs, timestamped hours later, was a second, larger transfer that had been blocked before it completed. Blocked by the same account. That doesn't track, Hae-Rin said, frowning at the data. Why break in and then stop your own breach? Marcus didn't have an answer. The anger in his chest made just enough room for something colder and more uncomfortable to sit beside it. He mentioned it to Victor, mostly to hear it said out loud by someone he trusted. People are complicated, Marcus, Victor said, pouring 2 drinks neither of them had asked for. Doesn't mean she wasn't working against you, doesn't mean part of her wasn't also trying to protect you. Both things can be true, doesn't make the betrayal hurt less. He set the glass in front of Marcus. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found this before the board vote, not after. It was, on its surface, exactly the kind of steady, reasonable thing Victor always said. Marcus didn't think to ask how Victor had known there even was a board vote at risk. Victor showed up again a few days later, unprompted, with a name for a cybersecurity firm he trusted, and an offer to sit in on the board meeting himself. So you've got someone in the room who isn't emotionally involved. Marcus took him up on it. Victor spoke calmly and persuasively to 2 nervous board members that week, walked them back from the edge of a vote that could have gutted the company's Asian expansion entirely, and left afterward with a handshake and a reminder to get some sleep. It was, by any measure, exactly what a loyal friend would have done. Marcus told himself that more than once in the weeks that followed, usually right after noticing some small detail that didn't quite add up and deciding, each time, that it probably meant nothing. Hae-Rin confronted her father for the first time in her adult life 2 days after Marcus walked out. Why does he have to be destroyed? She demanded, standing in the study where she'd found the file. Tell me all of it. Her father studied her a long moment, because his family took something from ours. What did they take? His jaw tightened. That's not something you need to carry. I'm the one carrying it. Her voice rose in a way it never had in that room. Tell me what they took. He said nothing. The silence went on long enough that Hae-Rin understood something she hadn't expected. He might not fully know either. He might have inherited the story the same way she had. The refusal changed something in her more than any answer could have. She didn't go home that night. She drove to the harbour instead and sat in her car for a long time, watching the lights on the water, before she called Marcus without entirely deciding to. It's late, he said when he picked up, his voice rough with sleep he hadn't been getting much of lately. I know I shouldn't have called. You did though, a pause, are you okay? She almost told him everything right there, 1:30 in the morning with the harbour lights blurring through her windshield. She got as far as I found something about my family, before her throat closed around the rest of it. About your family or about us? Marcus asked, careful, like he already sensed the ground shifting under a conversation he didn't fully understand yet. I don't know how to separate those anymore, she said, which was truer than anything she'd told him in weeks, even if it explained nothing. He didn't push. Come by tomorrow, he said instead. We don't have to talk about anything you don't want to. Okay, she said and meant it. And then Thursday happened before tomorrow ever came, and she never made it to his door the way she'd planned. The weeks after the breach were the hardest of Marcus's professional life. Word moved through his industry the way it always did, quietly, then all at once. 2 board members called an emergency meeting. An investor 8 months into negotiations pulled out without warning. His name, which had always meant something solid, started to carry a question mark it never had before. You need to distance yourself from her publicly, Hae-Rin told him, whatever this was. I know what it's costing me, Marcus said and didn't discuss it further. His mother came by during the worst of it, letting herself in the way she always did. You look like you haven't slept, she said. I haven't. She sat across from him and was quiet for a long moment. I need to tell you about your father. He looked up. 22 years ago he made a deal with a Korean company, Sea Group. Everyone on their side believed he stole from them. It nearly destroyed him. He spent years trying to clear a reputation he swore he didn't deserve, and I don't think most people ever believed him. Her voice held something old and unresolved. I never wanted you near that world, Marcus. I watched it wear him down until it killed him early. I didn't want that for you too. Did he deserve it, the reputation? No, Diane said, and the certainty in it startled him. He didn't. Marcus sat with that a long time after she left. His father's early death, his mother's careful silences, a family across an ocean who believed a story he was only now starting to doubt, a missing transfer Hae-Rin still couldn't explain, an advisor who kept saying exactly the right, comforting thing at exactly the right moment. He needed to talk to Hae-Rin. He hated how much he still wanted to. Hae-Rin, for her part, kept pulling at the thread the file had started. She found herself circling one name that kept appearing at the edges of both families' old records. A consultant who had advised the negotiations 22 years earlier and had gone on, in the decades since, to build a career quietly profiting from deals on both sides of a conflict that never seemed to end. The name was Victor Answer. She didn't have proof. She had a pattern, and patterns weren't evidence, not yet. She needed something concrete before she said a word to anyone, and getting it meant getting close to records she had no legitimate reason to see. Weeks later, at Reed Horizon's annual charity gala, Hae-Rin arrived with a folder she'd spent 3 sleepless nights assembling, and with something else tucked inside her coat that she never intended to use but needed Marcus's security to believe she might. Her father had learned that same afternoon exactly what she'd been doing. The room went quiet as she crossed the marble floor. Hae-Rin, Marcus's voice when he saw her, carried a fear that had nothing to do with what she might be holding. "Tell me you didn't come here to kill me," he said. "I wish I could," she answered. Because if she truly had come only to hurt him, none of this would cost her nearly as much as it did. "Then why are you crying?" Her phone buzzed. She looked down and her face went pale. "What did they threaten you with?" "Your mother," she said, and it wasn't a lie. An hour earlier, a voice she didn't recognize had made it very clear what would happen to Diane Reed if Hae-Rin didn't hand over what she was carrying before the gala ended. "Marcus, I need 30 seconds, she said, low and fast, her hands shaking. "Get your real security, not the men Victor brought in tonight." Marcus's eyes moved past her, found Answer near the bar, watching them with an expression that had shifted, in the space of a breath, from calm to something far more alert. "Hae-Rin," Marcus said, loud enough to carry, "find Victor, now." What followed happened fast. Answer's men, unfamiliar faces Marcus had never questioned before tonight, moving toward Hae-Rin before Hae-Rin's team reached them first. A tense standoff near the terrace doors. Answer himself, cornered, going very quiet in a way that felt more damning than anything he could have said. No one raised a hand. No shots were fired. But by the time police arrived to take statements, half the room understood that something enormous had been prevented rather than caused, even if almost no one there understood what it had actually been. For a few long minutes nobody in the ballroom fully understood what they'd just watched. Guests clustered near the walls in confused knots, phones half raised and then lowered again, waiters frozen mid-step with trays of champagne no one was drinking anymore. Someone asked loudly whether they should call for an ambulance. No one had been hurt. It didn't stop the room from feeling, for a while, like something worse had almost happened. Marcus didn't get the full picture that night, and neither did anyone watching it unfold from the edges of the room. What he got, standing in a side office while lawyers and officers worked through the chaos outside, was Hae-Rin, exhausted, still shaking, and the folder she finally handed him without a single word of explanation attached to it. "Read it when you're ready," she said, "not tonight." He didn't open it that night. He looked at her instead. "When did you stop being my enemy?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "It didn't happen all at once." "Then when did you start loving me?" She was quiet a moment, before I realized I was allowed to. He didn't reach for her. Some part of him wanted to, he didn't. "You still lied to me," he said, "for months." "I know. That doesn't disappear because tonight went the way it did." "I'm not asking it to." Her voice held steady even though her eyes didn't. "I'm asking for the chance to earn something back, that's all." "That's going to take time." "I have time," she said, "if you'll let me use it." He didn't answer right away. Outside the side office, someone was giving a statement to police in a low, tired voice, and somewhere further off a valet was quietly explaining to a departing guest that yes, the gala had technically ended early. None of it felt real yet. Marcus looked at her a long moment, the exhaustion in her face, the folder still sitting unopened between them. 6 months compressed into a single terrible, clarifying night, and understood that whatever came next wasn't going to be simple, and that he wanted it anyway. "Okay," he said finally, "time." He read the folder 3 days later, alone at his kitchen counter, and it took him most of the night to get through it. There were shipping manifests from 22 years ago that didn't match the ones his father had kept. There was a signature on the original agreement that looked, under close comparison with 3 other documents from the same period, subtly wrong, the pressure of the pen slightly different, the loop of a letter that his father, according to every other surviving sample, never wrote that way. There were consulting invoices, spaced out over 2 decades, paid quietly by both the Reed family's early holding company and, years later, by a shell entity connected to the Seoul family, for services neither side had ever discussed with the other. The name on all of them was the same. When he finished, he sat with it for a long time before he called his mother. "I think I know who hurt Dad," he said. Her silence this time was different, not evasive, just tired, like something she'd half suspected for 2 decades finally being said out loud. Hae-Rin's reckoning with her own family was slower and far less clean. Her father, confronted with proof that the debt he'd spent his life collecting had never been real in the way he believed, didn't apologize so much as go quiet, the heavy, specific silence of a man realizing he'd shaped his life, and his daughters, around a story someone else had built for profit. Hae-Rin stepped back from the family's business in the weeks that followed, not with slammed doors. With a series of small, deliberate choices that put distance between herself and a life she no longer wanted to inherit. It cost her nearly everything she'd grown up believing was permanent. She didn't take it back. Sir found her once more, weeks after, this time not in a parking garage but at a small apartment she'd taken on the other side of the city, sparse and unfamiliar and entirely her own. "Your father asks about you," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "He doesn't say it, but he does. Tell him I'm fine. Are you?" She thought about it honestly before answering, which was new for her. "I'm becoming something," she said. "I don't know yet if fine is the right word for it." Son nodded slowly, like that answer satisfied something he hadn't expected to be satisfied by, and left without saying anything else. It was, in its own quiet way, the closest thing to a goodbye either of them would get. Months later, in early spring, Marcus asked her to dinner. Not because a mission required it, not because either of their families demanded anything of them anymore, just because he wanted to, and she said yes without needing to check with anyone first. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked, outside a small restaurant chosen for its quiet rather than its name. "Are you sure you trust me?" she asked, and there was real feeling behind the question, not performance. "Not completely," he said honestly, without bitterness. "But I think trust is something we build, if we're both willing to keep showing up for it." "I'd like that," Hae-Rin said. "I'd like to keep showing up." They walked in together, no security trailing at a distance, no phone counting down to anything, no version of either of them performing for anyone but themselves. Inside, the restaurant was small and unremarkable in the best possible way, the kind of place where no one recognized his face or knew what her family used to be. They argued lightly over what to order. She won. He complained about it for the rest of the meal, and ordered the same thing anyway the next time they came back. And there would be a next time, and then several more after that, none of them requiring a countdown or a threat or a folder full of 22-year-old proof to justify them. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were conversations they still hadn't finished, and wounds that would take longer than a season to close all the way. Marcus still caught himself some nights, running through the timeline of who had known what and when, unable to fully let it go. Hae-Rin still flinched, occasionally at unfamiliar phone numbers, a habit 2 decades of one life didn't unlearn in a single spring. But it was, for the first time since a ballroom full of strangers had watched them nearly lose everything, a beginning they were choosing on their own terms together, and for no reason but their own.